The first time I realized my own family was capable of erasing me, it wasn't loud. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic betrayal you'd expect from a story like this. It happened quietly over a glass of lukewarm iced tea at my parents' dining table on a Tuesday afternoon that smelled like lemon cleaner and denial. If you had asked me that morning who I was, I would have said I was the dependable one. The daughter who showed up, the sister who smoothed things over, the woman who never made trouble even when trouble was made of her. I was 31 years old, and still trying to earn a place I'd been born into. That afternoon, my mother sat at the head of the table, hands folded like she was preparing to say grace. My father stood near the window, staring out at the backyard he loved more than any of us. My younger sister, Claire, leaned back in her chair, scrolling on her phone with the confidence of someone who already knew how the story ended. "I didn't. We just want everyone to be clear," my mother said, her voice sweet-measured. The same tone she used when she wanted something to sound reasonable, even if it wasn't. "This is about fairness." Fairness. That word always came right before I lost something. She slid a thin manila folder across the table. It stopped just short of my hand, as if even paper knew not to touch me without permission. "What's this?" I asked. Claire didn't look up. "It's about the house." My stomach tightened. The house. The one my grandmother had built with my grandfather when they had nothing but stubborn hope and a toolbox borrowed from a neighbor. The house I spent summers repainting, winters repairing pipes with my grandfather, weekends cleaning while Claire went out with friends. My mother smiled. "Your father and I have decided that Claire will be moving in." I blinked. "Moving in temporarily?" "No," my father said without turning around. "Permanently." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "But Grandma's will," I began. "She left the house to both of us. She was very clear about that." Claire finally looked up, eyes sharp, almost amused. "Mom and Dad are handling it." Handling it. Another phrase that usually meant I'd be handled right out of the picture. My mother sighed like I was exhausting her. "Your sister needs stability right now. She has the children. You're single. You can manage." There it was. The sentence that had followed me my entire life. "You can manage." I laughed once, short and hollow. "So I'm excluded." "No one is excluding you," my mother said quickly. "Don't be dramatic." The word hit like a slap. Dramatic. The family's favorite way of dismissing my pain. "What about the business?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Grandma said it was to be divided equally. The family business. A small but profitable catering company I had helped keep alive when my parents wanted to sell it off. The company I ran logistics for, negotiated contracts, kept afloat during hard seasons. My father finally turned. "Claire will take over ownership. You'll stay on, of course." As what I asked. My mother smiled again. "Support." "Support? Not partner, not owner. Support." I looked at my sister. "You didn't think to tell me any of this." She shrugged, casual. "I knew you'd take it personally." That hurt more than the decision itself. I pushed the folder back toward my mother. "I need time." Her smile vanished. "Time for what?" "To decide if I want to keep giving everything to people who take without asking." The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable. Claire rolled her eyes. My father rubbed his forehead. My mother straightened in her chair. "This attitude," she said coldly, "is exactly why we made this choice." There it was, the justification. I wasn't excluded because they favored her. I was excluded because I reacted. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. "I've spent my entire life making myself smaller so this family could feel comfortable," I said. "I won't do it anymore." My mother scoffed. "You're being ungrateful." I smiled, then a tight, strange smile. "No, I'm being awake." I walked out before anyone could stop me. The door closed softly behind me. No one followed. In my car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding. I should have cried. I should have screamed. Instead, I felt something colder settle in my chest. Clarity. They hadn't just made a decision. They'd revealed the rules of the game. And for the first time, I understood something important. I had been playing fair in a family that never did. As I drove away, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "Don't overreact. This is just how families work." I didn't reply. That night, alone in my apartment, I pulled out an old box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were documents my grandmother had given me quietly years ago. Notes, emails, a copy of an earlier draft of her will. At the time, I thought she was being sentimental. Now I realized she had been preparing me. I sat on the floor, paper spread around me, heart slowing as understanding replaced shock. There were clauses my parents had conveniently ignored, conditions that hadn't been met, assets that weren't as securely transferred as they believed. And for the first time since that afternoon at the table, I felt something close to power. They thought I was excluded. They thought I would manage. They had no idea what I was about to reclaim. I looked at my phone still dark and silent and whispered to the empty room, "You should have finished me when you had the chance." The game had already begun. The first thing I did the morning after was nothing. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text my sister. I didn't even reread the messages that had piled up overnight, each one dripping with the same tone I'd known since childhood. Confusion dressed up as concern. Concern hiding irritation. Irritation masking fear. I let the silence stretch. For most of my life, silence had been my punishment. Now I was learning how to use it. Sunlight crept through the blinds of my apartment, cutting the room into neat stripes. I sat at the small kitchen table with my grandmother's papers spread out in front of me, coffee going cold at my elbow. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, firm, careful, purposeful. She had never wasted words and she had never trusted appearances. At the top of one page, she had written a sentence that made my chest tighten. "If they ever try to cut you out, this is where you start." I exhaled slowly. Grandma had known. Maybe not the specifics, but the pattern. The way love in our family came with conditions. The way generosity always flowed in one direction. The documents weren't dramatic. No smoking gun, no single line that screamed injustice. But together they told a story my parents had counted on me never reading closely. The house wasn't fully transferred. The business shares hadn't been legally consolidated. Certain decisions required unanimous consent from beneficiaries, consent they didn't have. I wasn't excluded, not yet. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. "Mom, we need to talk." "Dad, your sister is upset." "Claire, you're making this harder than it needs to be." I turned the phone face down. I wasn't making anything harder. I was just no longer absorbing the impact for them. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Claire stood there, arms crossed, sunglasses pushed up into her hair like armor. She looked irritated, not worried. That was always her tell. "You're really doing this," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I leaned against the counter. "Doing what?" "This whole silent treatment thing. It's childish." I almost laughed. Childish. Coming from the woman who had just taken a house that wasn't hers. "You didn't answer my texts," she continued. "Mom's spiraling." "She'll survive," I said calmly. Claire's eyes narrowed. "You don't get it. This isn't about you." I met her gaze. "That's funny. It never is." She scoffed. "You're acting like a victim." "No," I said. "I'm acting like someone who read the fine print." That got her attention. "What fine print?" I didn't answer. I just picked up one of the documents and slid it across the counter toward her. She glanced at it, frowned, then looked back up. "What is this?" "Something Grandma wanted me to have," I said. "You should probably ask Mom and Dad why they didn't mention it." Her confidence wavered for the first time. Just slightly, enough to notice. "You're bluffing," she said. I smiled. "You've always underestimated me. That's kind of your thing." She straightened. "Even if there's some technicality, it doesn't matter. Mom and Dad made their decision." "Decisions don't override the law," I said. "And they definitely don't override Grandma." Claire laughed, but it sounded forced. "You'd really take us to court." There it was, the accusation, the moral pressure. "I would protect what was left to me," I said. "The same way you're protecting what you think is yours." She stared at me for a long moment, then shook her head. "You're unbelievable." "No," I said quietly. "I'm done being convenient." She left without another word, the door slamming harder than necessary. I sat down slowly, heart racing but steady underneath. That exchange had confirmed something important. They were nervous. Later that afternoon, I met with a lawyer. Not one my parents knew, not one who owed my father favors or my mother polite smiles at fundraisers. I chose her because she was sharp, direct, and didn't soften her words for anyone. She flipped through the documents, nodding occasionally. "You're not imagining things," she said finally. "They moved fast, but they didn't move clean." "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means you still have leverage," she said. "And leverage makes people honest." Honest, that would be new. On my way home, I stopped by the catering company. I hadn't planned to, but something pulled me there. Maybe habit, maybe grief. The place looked the same. Stainless steel counters, faded menu boards, the faint smell of spices and sugar. Megan, one of our longtime employees, looked up when I walked in. "Hey," she said carefully. "I heard about the changes." Of course she had. News traveled fast when it involved ownership. "What changes?" I asked. She hesitated. Claire told us she's taking over. Said you're stepping back. I felt a familiar burn behind my ribs. She said that. Megan nodded. She said you wanted a break. I smiled slow and deliberate. Interesting. Did she put that in writing? Megan's eyes widened slightly. No. Good, I said, because it's not true. That night back at home, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not an email, not a message, a timeline. Every instance of being overlooked, every favor asked without thanks, every moment my contribution was minimized or erased. I wasn't angry anymore, I was methodical. Revenge. I realized wasn't about explosions, it was about structure, about letting people trip over the systems they assumed you weren't smart enough to understand. As I typed, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. We raised you better than this, his voicemail said. Don't tear the family apart. I deleted it without listening twice. The family had been tearing itself apart for years. I had just stopped holding it together. Before bed, I reread my grandmother's handwriting one last time. There was a line at the bottom of a page I hadn't noticed before. They will say you're cruel when you stop giving. That doesn't make them right. I turned off the light, the room falling into quiet darkness. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid of what came next. I felt ready, and somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind was busy rearranging the past with new information. It was unsettling how different everything looked once I stopped assuming good intentions. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling fan, as it turned slowly, counting rotations the way I used to count apologies. Somewhere between the fifth and the sixth rotation, I realized something that made my chest tighten. They weren't upset because I was wrong. They were upset because I was no longer predictable. By morning, my phone was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that meant a strategy meeting had taken place without me. I made coffee strong and bitter and sat by the window watching the city wake up. People hurried past carrying briefcases, coffee cups, small pieces of their own dramas. None of them knew my family had just shifted into crisis mode. Around 10, my lawyer emailed me a short summary. Clean, direct, no drama. You have standing. Do not relinquish access to company accounts. Document everything. Expect pressure. Pressure I could handle. I'd been under it my entire life. What I hadn't expected was the call from my aunt later that morning, my mother's older sister, the family translator, the woman who specialized in saying ugly things politely. Honey, she began, her voice syrupy and careful. Your mother's heartbroken. I leaned back in my chair. Is she? She feels blindsided, my aunt continued. She never thought you'd respond this way. Respond this way. As if I'd thrown a tantrum instead of asking not to be erased. I didn't respond, I said calmly. I reacted. My aunt sighed. You know what I mean. Families don't need lawyers, they need grace. I closed my eyes. Grace. Another word that always seemed to mean surrender. Grace without boundaries is just permission, I said. I'm done giving that. She paused, clearly not expecting resistance. Your sister has been through a lot. So have I replied. I just didn't make it everyone else's problem. The call ended shortly after. No resolution, just another bridge lightly singed. By early afternoon, the pressure started to take shape. Emails from vendors, messages from employees, subtle shifts in tone, questions that sounded innocent but carried an edge. Are you still approving payments? Who should we report to now? Claire mentioned a restructuring. I answered each one calmly, clearly, and in writing. Nothing makes manipulators more uncomfortable than documentation. That evening, I drove past the house. I hadn't planned to stop, but my hands turned the wheel without consulting me. The old place looked the same. White siding, wide porch, the oak tree my grandfather planted the year I was born. Claire's car was in the driveway. I didn't go in. I just sat there for a moment, engine running, watching the porch light flick on as dusk settled. I wondered if she felt triumphant yet, or if there was a small, unfamiliar knot forming in her stomach. Back home, I found an envelope taped to my door, my mother's handwriting, precise, controlled. Inside was a single page. We don't recognize this version of you. If you continue down this path, you will damage relationships that can't be repaired. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a warning. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in the same box as my grandmother's documents. Evidence. That night, I opened my laptop again and pulled up the company's financials. I hadn't looked at them in months. Not closely. I trusted my parents, trusted Claire. That trust evaporated in less than an hour. There were discrepancies, small ones, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. Vendor payments routed through personal accounts, expenses labeled vaguely, decisions made without proper approval. Nothing illegal enough to cause panic yet, but enough to raise questions, enough to shift power. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady, pulse slow. This wasn't about revenge anymore, not in the way people like to imagine it. This was about balance, about restoring weight to a scale that had been tipped for decades. My phone buzzed once more, a text from Claire. "We need to talk, face to face." I stared at it for a long moment before typing back. "Tomorrow. Bring mom and dad and the paperwork." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Fine." I set the phone down and allowed myself one small smile. They were coming to me now. Before bed, I took out the old photo album I'd nearly thrown away years ago. Pictures of holidays, birthdays, forced smiles. In most of them, Claire was centered, spotlighted. I was always slightly to the side, cropped, shadowed. At the back of the album, tucked between 2 pages, was a photo my grandmother had taken of me alone, sitting on the porch steps mid-laugh, unaware of the camera. I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb. She saw me, even when no one else did. I placed the photo on my nightstand and turned off the light. Tomorrow wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be explosive, but it would be decisive. And for the first time, I wasn't walking into a family meeting to beg for understanding. I was walking in with leverage. The meeting didn't happen where I expected. I assumed they'd insist on my parents' house, the familiar territory where I'd been trained to soften my voice and swallow my objections. Instead, Claire suggested a neutral place. A coffee shop near the office, glass walls, public, witnesses. That told me everything I needed to know. People don't ask for neutrality when they're confident. They ask for it when they want to control the optics. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table near the window. Not because I wanted to be seen, but because I wanted to see. The street outside was busy, people moving with purpose, lives unfolding without consulting anyone else. It steadied me. When they walked in together, I noticed how tightly my mother held her purse, how my father's shoulders curved inward like he was already tired, how Claire walked a half step ahead of them, chin lifted. She had always believed leadership meant walking first, not checking if anyone was still behind you. They sat down across from me, no hugs, no pleasantries. "This is unnecessary," my mother said immediately. "We could have handled this at home." I folded my hands on the table. "You mean decided without me?" Claire sighed dramatically. "See, this is what I mean. You're already on the attack." I looked at her, really looked. The careful hair, the practiced irritation, the certainty that she would be backed no matter what she said next. "No," I said evenly. "I'm on the record." My father cleared his throat. "Your mother and I are concerned about the direction this is going." Concern. Another familiar word. "I brought what you asked for," Claire said, placing a slim folder on the table. "The paperwork." She slid it toward me the same way my mother had days earlier. Almost the same gesture, almost the same arrogance. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed my own folder on the table. Thicker, older, heavier. My mother's eyes flicked to it. "What's that?" "Context," I said. The barista called out an order behind us. Milk steamed, cups clinked, the world kept going. Claire leaned back. "We don't have time for theatrics." I finally opened her folder. It was what I expected. Updated operating agreements, revised ownership statements, language that assumed my consent where none had been given. "You filed these," I said, looking at my father. He nodded. "We were advised it would simplify things." "Simplify for whom?" I asked. "For the business," my mother snapped. "Claire is better positioned to lead." I smiled faintly. "Based on what?" Claire's jaw tightened. "I have a family. I need stability. And I asked. Because I don't have children." My mother waved a dismissive hand. "Don't twist this into something it's not." I opened my own folder then. Slowly, carefully. I laid out my grandmother's draft will, the addendum, the handwritten notes. My father's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" my mother demanded. "She gave it to me," I said, "years ago," quietly. Claire leaned forward, scanning the pages. "This doesn't mean anything. It was a draft." "It means she anticipated this," I replied. "And she set conditions you never met." My father rubbed his face. "We didn't think it was necessary to revisit old paperwork." "Of course not," I said. "It was inconvenient." Claire scoffed. "So what, you're threatening us?" "No," I said. "I'm informing you." The word hung between us. I continued, voice calm, steady. "The house isn't legally transferred, neither are the shares. Any attempt to move forward without unanimous consent can be challenged." My mother's voice dropped. You'd really do that to your own family. There it was, the guilt card, played late as always. You already did it to me, I said. I'm just responding. Silence stretched. The coffee shop felt louder. A couple nearby laughed. Someone's phone rang. Claire straightened, regaining her composure. Let's be honest. This isn't about legality. It's about resentment. I nodded. Yes, but not the way you think. I leaned forward for the first time. I resented being invisible, being useful but not valued, being told to manage while everything I helped build was handed away. My father looked down at the table. My mother crossed her arms. We did what we thought was best. That's the problem, I said softly. You never thought about me at all. Claire laughed sharply. You're exaggerating. I met her eyes. Tell me one decision in the last 10 years where you asked what I wanted. She opened her mouth, closed it. I didn't press, I didn't need to. I'm not here to blow things up, I said. I'm here to reset them. And what does that look like? My father asked quietly. It looks like transparency, I replied. Equal ownership, independent audit, no unilateral decisions. Claire shook her head. You're trying to humiliate me. No, I said, I'm removing the pedestal. My mother's voice trembled with anger. If you go through with this, you will destroy this family. I felt something in me loosen then. A knot I hadn't known I was still holding. This family taught me that love was conditional, I said. I'm done paying that price. Claire stood abruptly. This is unbelievable. Sit down, my father said, surprising all of us. She froze. Slowly she sat. He looked at me then, really looked. What do you want? The question wasn't hostile, it was tired, honest. I want what was promised, I said. And I want acknowledgement that I mattered. My mother scoffed. Acknowledgement won't change anything. It changes me, I said. The meeting ended without resolution. No raised voices, no tears, just a quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted. As they left, Claire turned back once. You're making a mistake. I smiled. I already made one. I trusted you. When I stepped outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. My hands were steady, my heart calm. This wasn't revenge yet. This was positioning. And for the first time in my life, I was standing exactly where I belonged. The days after the meeting felt eerily calm, the kind of calm that only comes before something breaks. No angry calls, no dramatic texts, just a polite, weaponized silence from my parents and a pointed absence from Claire. I knew that quiet well. It meant regrouping, strategy, damage control. I didn't mistake it for peace. On Wednesday morning, I walked into the catering office like I always had, keys in hand, posture relaxed, eyes open. The staff looked up with that same careful curiosity I'd noticed earlier, as if they were watching a weather system form offshore. Megan caught my eye. They're in the back, she said quietly. Of course they were. I set my bag down and walked straight to the conference room. Through the glass wall, I could see my father, two men in suits I didn't recognize, and Claire at the head of the table, laptop open, smiling too wide. I stepped in without knocking. The room went still. Hannah, my father said, forcing a smile. We didn't expect you today. I work here, I replied. That hasn't changed. One of the men cleared his throat. We were just reviewing some restructuring options. Without notifying a co-owner, I asked, turning my gaze to him. That's interesting. Claire snapped her laptop shut. You don't own anything yet. I smiled. Neither do you. That's kind of the point. My father stood. This is getting out of hand. No, I said calmly. This is getting documented. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, screen lit. Please continue. I'd love to hear what you were planning without me. The men exchanged looks. One of them shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should reschedule. Probably, I agreed. After legal counsel reviews your involvement. They gathered their things, quickly murmuring apologies. When the door closed behind them, the room felt smaller. Claire rounded on me. You're sabotaging me. I met her glare evenly. You sabotaged yourself the moment you assumed I'd stay quiet. My father sank back into his chair. He looked older than he had a week ago. Smaller. You're forcing our hand, he said. I tilted my head. No, I'm forcing honesty. Claire laughed sharp and bitter. You always think you're smarter than everyone else. No, I said. I finally stopped believing you were. That landed harder than I expected. She flinched. Later that afternoon, the first real crack appeared. The auditor my lawyer had quietly recommended called me directly. His voice was calm, professional. There are irregularities, he said. Nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to warrant a deeper look. My pulse quickened, but my voice stayed level. How deep? Deep enough that some people might get nervous. I thanked him and hung up, staring out the office window. Nervous was good. Nervous meant mistakes. That evening my mother called. Her tone had shifted, softer, Careful. Your father isn't sleeping, she said. This stress isn't good for him. I leaned against my kitchen counterphone tucked between shoulder and ear. Then maybe he should stop trying to rewrite history. She inhaled sharply. Why are you doing this? The question wasn't angry, it was almost afraid. I'm correcting a narrative, I said. One where I disappear so things can be simpler for you. That's not fair, she whispered. I closed my eyes. Neither was raising me to believe love was earned by obedience. Silence. Then quietly Claire is falling apart. I felt a flicker of something. Not guilt, not satisfaction, recognition. She built her life on certainty, I said. This is what uncertainty feels like. You could stop this, my mother said. You could let things go back. I thought of my grandmother's handwriting, of the photo on my nightstand, of every moment I'd been told to manage. No, I said, I couldn't. The call ended without goodbye. By Friday, the staff had picked sides without realizing it. People started looping me into emails again, asking for approvals, double-checking instructions that had once gone straight to Claire. Power doesn't announce itself. It shifts quietly through habit. That night, Claire showed up at my apartment. She looked different, tired, edges frayed. I never wanted this, she said, standing in my doorway. I crossed my arms. Neither did I. She laughed weakly. You always do this, act like you're above it. No, I said softly. I'm just done pretending I'm beneath you. Her eyes filled with something that looked dangerously close to panic. They're questioning everything. The accounts, the decisions. They're looking at me like I'm careless. I studied her face. The sister I'd defended for years. The one who had always assumed I'd clean up behind her. You were careless, I said, with me. She swallowed. What do you want? The question echoed my father's from days earlier. It sounded different coming from her, smaller. I want you to tell the truth, I said, out loud. To them. Her jaw tightened. They'll never forgive me. I shrugged. Welcome to the club. She left without answering. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. By Monday morning, the audit was official. Emails went out. Meetings were scheduled. Words like oversight and compliance started appearing where blind trust used to live. Claire didn't call, my parents didn't visit, and for the first time the family system I'd grown up in was being forced to operate without my silence smoothing the gears. This wasn't the explosion yet. This was the slow realization that the rules had changed, and they were no longer written for my disappearance. By the time the audit formally began, my name was everywhere. Not in headlines, not in accusations, just quietly, steadily attached to processes, approvals, signatures, places it hadn't been before, places my family never expected it to be. Power doesn't arrive like a storm. It settles like dust unnoticed until you realize you're breathing it in. On Tuesday morning, I received a calendar invite I wasn't supposed to see. A closed-door meeting. Executives only. Claire had forwarded it to the wrong distribution list in a moment of stress or arrogance, probably both. I stared at the subject line for a long time. Strategic transition discussion. They weren't planning to fix things. They were planning to sidestep me. I didn't respond. I didn't confront. I did what I'd learned to do best. I prepared. The meeting was scheduled for 10. At 9:55, I walked into the conference room with a legal pad and a calm expression. The same calm they'd mistaken for compliance my entire life. The room went silent. Claire looked up first. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. This is a private meeting. So was the paperwork you filed without my consent, I said, evenly taking a seat. Yet here we are. One of the outside consultants shifted uncomfortably. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. You can't just barge in, Claire snapped. I placed my legal pad on the table. I can when my name is on the documents you're discussing. That did it. One of the consultants cleared his throat. Perhaps we should clarify ownership before proceeding. Yes, I said. Perhaps you should. My father's hands trembled slightly as he folded them together. This isn't helping. I met his eyes. Neither did pretending I didn't exist. The meeting dissolved shortly after. No decisions made, no strategy agreed upon, just uncertainty hanging in the air like a warning. Afterward, Megan pulled me aside. People are talking, she said quietly. About what I asked. She hesitated. About how much you actually do around here. I smiled faintly. Funny how visibility works. That afternoon, the real twist arrived. I was reviewing old contracts when I found it. Buried deep. A clause I'd skimmed over years ago because it didn't seem relevant then. A contingency provision tied to mismanagement. In plain language, it stated that if fiduciary negligence could be demonstrated by a managing partner, control could be temporarily reassigned to protect company assets. Reassigned. My chest tightened not with excitement but with something colder. Precision. I forwarded the document to my lawyer with a single line. Please confirm. Her response came less than an hour later. This is actionable and timely. I sat back in my chair, heart steady. That evening, my father called. Not my mother, not Claire. Him. Hannah, he said quietly, we need to talk. We met at a small diner on the edge of town. Neutral ground. A place that smelled like coffee and old vinyl booths. Somewhere he couldn't posture. He looked tired. Older than I remembered. The man who had once been unshakable now stirred his drink like he didn't know where to put his hands. This has gone too far, he said. I studied him. For whom? For your sister, he said quickly. She's overwhelmed. I waited. And for your mother, he added, she's embarrassed. I nodded. Anyone else? He sighed. You. That surprised me. In what way, I asked. You're changing, he said. You're harder, colder. I leaned back. I was always hard. I just learned to stop breaking myself so you wouldn't have to see it. He looked down. We didn't mean to hurt you. That doesn't undo it, I said gently. Intent doesn't erase impact. He swallowed. Claire isn't equipped for this. I tilted my head. Neither was I, but I managed. There was that word again. Manage. He looked up sharply. What do you want? I already told you, I said. Equity, transparency, and accountability. And if we give you that, he asked. I met his gaze. Then this stays professional. And if we don't, I let the silence answer. The next day, the audit report came back preliminary. Not damning, but damning enough. Misclassified expenses, unauthorized decisions, patterns that suggested carelessness at best, negligence at worst. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday. Claire didn't speak to me all week. On Thursday night, she showed up again. This time she was angry, not panicked, angry. You planned this, she said, pacing my living room. You waited until everyone trusted you again. I crossed my arms. I didn't plan your mistakes. You exploited them. No, I said. I stopped covering for them. She laughed bitterly. You always wanted this. Control. I shook my head. I wanted respect. She stopped pacing. You're going to take everything from me. I looked at her, really looked. No. I'm taking back what you took from me. Her voice cracked. I didn't know you felt this way. That's because you never asked, I replied. She left without slamming the door this time. Friday morning I wore black. Not for mourning, for clarity. The boardroom was full. Lawyers, advisors, my parents. Claire pale and rigid at the far end of the table. The auditor presented his findings calmly, professionally. No drama, just facts. When he finished, the room went quiet. The chairperson turned to me. As co-owner, what is your position? Every eye landed on me. I took a breath. I'm not interested in punishment, I said. I'm interested in stability. For the company. For the employees. Claire scoffed under her breath. I propose temporary reassignment of operational control, I continued. Pending full review. My father closed his eyes. The vote passed. Not unanimously, but decisively. Claire stood abruptly. You can't do this. I met her gaze. I didn't do this, you did. She left the room in tears. My mother followed her. No one followed me. After the meeting, Megan hugged me quietly. Thank you, she said. Things already feel calmer. That night alone in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The system that had relied on my silence had finally collapsed under its own weight. And for the first time I wasn't reacting. I was leading, but I knew something else too. This wasn't the end. It was just the moment they realized I was no longer the one they could afford to ignore. The first week after the board decision felt unreal, like walking through a house after a storm where everything looks intact until you notice what's shifted underneath. I didn't move into Claire's office. I didn't change the locks. I didn't make speeches. I showed up early, left late, and did exactly what I had always done, only this time no one could pretend it didn't matter. That was the most unsettling part for everyone else. Employees stopped whispering when I walked by. They started asking questions, real ones, about budgets, about schedules, about decisions that used to be made behind closed doors and announced like decrees. I answered every single one. Claire didn't come in at all that week. My mother called twice and hung up without leaving a message. My father sent one email short and stiff thanking me for stabilizing operations. Stabilizing. Another word that meant cleaning up a mess I didn't make. But something else was happening too, something quieter. People were telling me things. It started small. A vendor mentioning a rushed approval. An employee recalling a meeting that didn't sit right. A bookkeeper asking carefully whether she should bring certain records directly to me now. By Thursday, I had a second file. This one wasn't from my grandmother. It wasn't legal language or clauses or drafts. It was stories, patterns, and one name kept appearing in the margins. Not Claire's, my mother's. That realization landed slowly like a bruise blooming under the skin. I had spent my life framing everything as sibling rivalry because it was easier, cleaner, less terrifying. But the truth was more uncomfortable. Claire had been favored. My mother had engineered it. That afternoon, I found myself standing in the supply room staring at shelves I'd organized years ago, hands trembling slightly as the pieces aligned. Claire wasn't just reckless. She was protected, always had been. Which meant the mismanagement wasn't just about incompetence. It was about entitlement taught and reinforced. That night, my mother showed up at my apartment without calling. She looked composed as always, hair perfect, coat pressed. The kind of woman who believed appearances were a moral value. "You humiliated your sister," she said the moment I opened the door. I stepped aside to let her in. "You raised her to believe she couldn't fail." She scoffed. "I raised her to survive." "At my expense," I said quietly. She turned sharply. "That's not fair." "There it is again," I said. "Fair." She set her purse down with deliberate care. "You don't understand what it's like to be a mother." I folded my arms. "I understand what it's like to be a daughter who learns early which love has conditions." Her jaw tightened. "Everything we did was to keep this family together." "No," I said. "It was to keep control." The word hung between us. She looked at me then with something I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not disappointment. Fear. "You're rewriting history," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm finally reading it without your edits." She took a step closer. "If you keep digging, you're going to hurt people you can't afford to lose." I met her gaze. "I already lost myself once. I'm not doing it again." She left shortly after, dignity intact, but something fractured behind her eyes. The next morning, the call came from my lawyer. "We've identified personal withdrawals tied to company funds," she said. "Small enough to hide, consistent enough to matter." My stomach dropped. "From Claire?" A pause. "From your mother." I closed my eyes. Of course. The favorite child wasn't the architect. She was the beneficiary. The real power had always sat at the head of the table. That afternoon, I confronted my father. We sat in his car, parked outside the old house engine off silence heavy. He stared straight ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel. "She doesn't know I know," I said. He nodded slowly, I figured. "You let it happen." He exhaled long and tired. I didn't stop it. The distinction sounded thin even to him. "She used the business as her safety net," I continued, "and blamed Claire when things went wrong." He rubbed his eyes. "Your mother was afraid." "So was I said, "but no one protected me." He finally looked at me. "What are you going to do?" The question wasn't defensive, it was resigned. "I'm not exposing her," I said. "Not yet." He flinched. "Yet." "I'm giving her a choice," I continued. "The same one I was never offered." He swallowed. "She won't take it well." "She doesn't have to," I said. "She just has to tell the truth." That evening I wrote a letter. Not an email, not a message she could delete or forward or spin. A letter. I laid out what I knew, the withdrawals, the approvals, the pattern. Then I ended with a single paragraph. "You can step back quietly and let the company stabilize, or this becomes public." Not as revenge, as record. I didn't send it right away. I slept on it. In the morning I woke with a strange calm. Not rage, not dread. Certainty. I delivered the letter by hand. She didn't call me for 2 days. On the third, she left a voicemail. Her voice was unsteady, stripped of its usual polish. "You've always been dramatic," she said, then paused. "But this time, you're right." I sat on my couch, phone in hand, listening to the rest. She didn't apologize. She didn't confess, but she agreed to step back, quietly. That night, I stood by the window again, city lights flickering below, and felt something settle inside me. This wasn't the explosive revenge people fantasized about. This was something sharper, more enduring, the kind of justice that doesn't scream. It restructures. And as I turned off the light, I understood something else too. The deeper the roots of betrayal, the longer the reckoning lasts. And mine wasn't over yet. When my mother stepped back, she did it the way she did everything else in her life, quietly, and with enough dignity to convince herself it had been her idea all along. There was no announcement, no explanation. One day, her name simply stopped appearing on approvals, on vendor calls, on internal emails she'd once answered before anyone else had a chance. People noticed, of course, but no one asked. In families like mine, questions were considered bad manners. The first real consequence wasn't legal or financial. It was emotional. Claire came back to the office the following Monday. She stood in the doorway of my new office, arms folded tight against her chest like she was bracing for impact. They won't even return my calls, she said. I looked up from my laptop. Who? Mom's friends. The ones who used to smooth things over. I nodded slowly. That's because they don't know where the power is anymore. She winced. They're acting like I'm invisible, she continued. Like I don't matter. The irony was almost painful. I closed my laptop. You matter, just not the way you're used to. She laughed bitterly. I hate that you're right. We sat in silence for a moment. Not the hostile kind. The uncertain kind. Why didn't you tell me, she asked suddenly. About Mom. I met her eyes. You never asked, and I wasn't ready to admit it myself. She swallowed. She said she was protecting us. She was protecting control, I said. There's a difference. Claire sank into the chair across from me, shoulders slumping. For the first time, she looked less like my rival, and more like a woman realizing the floor beneath her had been built on something rotten. I don't know who I am without her backing me, she whispered. The words hit harder than any accusation she'd ever thrown at me. Neither did I said quietly. I just had to figure it out sooner. She didn't respond. She just nodded, eyes fixed on the desk. Later that day, the rumor mill caught fire. Someone leaked that my mother had stepped away due to personal reasons. Another whispered about a health scare. A third suggested burnout. I didn't correct any of it. Truth doesn't need defending when lies are busy contradicting each other. That evening, my father invited me to dinner. Alone. No Claire, no Mom. We ate in silence, at first the clink of silverware loud in the small kitchen. He looked around as if seeing the house for the first time. It's quieter, he said finally. Yes, I replied. It is. He set his fork down. Your mother doesn't know what to do with herself. I took a sip of water. Neither did I when I stopped managing everyone's feelings. He smiled faintly. You always were the strong one. The words landed differently this time. I wasn't strong, I said. I was trained. He nodded slowly. I see that now. After dinner, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a key. What's this? I asked. The office safe, he said. Your mother asked me to give it to you. I studied the key cold and heavy in my palm. Another quiet surrender. The next morning, I opened the safe. Inside were documents I hadn't expected. Old ledgers, notes, correspondence. Proof that the financial patterns went back further than I'd realized. Years. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, but it passed quickly. I wasn't shocked anymore. I was resolved. The fallout wasn't immediate, it came in waves. First, a longtime vendor backed out citing instability, then a minor client delayed a contract. Small disruptions, manageable ones. But I knew something else was coming, and it arrived in the form of a letter. A formal notice, legal letterhead, language cold and precise. My mother was contesting the board decision, claiming undue influence, claiming emotional manipulation, claiming I had coerced her into stepping down. I read the letter twice, then a third time, feeling something unexpected rise in me. Relief. This was the confrontation I'd been waiting for. She was finally stepping into the light. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer with one line. She's chosen. That afternoon, Claire came into my office, again letter in hand. She's suing, she said flatly. Yes, I replied. She is. Claire looked at me, fear and anger warring on her face. This is your fault. I nodded, and hers and yours and mine. That's how systems work. She sank into the chair again. What happens now? I leaned back, folding my hands. Now we stopped pretending this was ever just a family disagreement. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Depositions scheduled, documents requested, timelines demanded. And with each step, something strange happened. The story shifted. It was no longer about a bitter daughter. It was about governance, about misuse of funds, about favoritism disguised as care. My mother's greatest weapon had always been her image. Now it was being examined under fluorescent lights. The night before the first deposition, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of me, and thought about the woman who had taught me how to smile while disappearing. I didn't hate her. I just didn't fear her anymore. And that, I realized, was the true turning point. Because once fear leaves the room, truth doesn't have to raise its voice. It just waits. And tomorrow it would speak. Depositions have a way of stripping people down without touching them. The room was small and windowless, the kind of space designed to make time feel heavier than it was. A long table. 2 pitchers of water. Legal pads lined up like shields. I sat at one end with my lawyer hands folded, posture steady. Across from us, my mother sat, perfectly composed, pearl earrings in place, spine straight, chin lifted. If someone didn't know our history, they might have thought she was the injured party. That was always her gift. The court reporter adjusted her machine. The opposing attorney cleared his throat. Formalities were exchanged. Then the questions began. Mrs. Bennet, can you describe your role in the company over the last 10 years? My mother smiled gently. I was mostly advisory, emotional support, really. Emotional support. I stared at the grain of the table, grounding myself. And did you have access to company accounts? Only in emergencies, she replied smoothly. My husband handled the finances. My father shifted beside her, barely perceptible, but I saw it. The attorney nodded. And how often would you say those emergencies occurred? My mother hesitated, just for a second, occasionally. Occasionally. Another word she liked, vague enough to hide a pattern. The attorney slid a document across the table. Are you familiar with this transfer? Her eyes flicked down, the pause stretched. Yes, she said carefully. That was to cover a shortfall. And this one? Yes. And this? She swallowed. Yes. The stack grew thicker. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I could feel the shift in the room, the tightening, the slow realization that control through charm doesn't hold up under recorded questions. When it was my turn, the tone changed. The opposing attorney leaned forward slightly. Ms. Bennet, would you say you have a strained relationship with your mother? I met his gaze. Yes. And your sister? Yes. So this action is personal. I shook my head. It's professional. He smiled thinly. Do you deny that resentment played a role? I thought about the years of silence, the quiet sacrifices, the conditioning. I deny that resentment is the cause, I said. It's the result. My lawyer placed a hand on the table. Let the record reflect that my client acted after discovering documented irregularities. The attorney leaned back, annoyed. Good. Afterward, in the hallway, my mother avoided my eyes. Claire hovered near the elevators, arms wrapped around herself. When the doors closed and it was just the two of us, she spoke. She didn't tell me it was this bad, she said. I pressed the down button. She never tells anyone the full truth. Claire's voice cracked. They're going to tear her apart. I looked at her then, really looked. They're asking questions, I said. That's not tearing someone apart. She shook her head. You don't understand. Her reputation is everything. I exhaled slowly. So was my dignity. The elevator dinged. Doors opened. She didn't get in. I don't know how to live in a family where no one is in charge, she said quietly. I stepped inside. Neither did I. You'll learn. That night the first article appeared. Not a headline, not yet. Just a small business column buried deep on a local site. Leadership dispute at family-owned firm raises governance questions. No names, no drama, just facts. But I knew what it meant. The second article followed 2 days later, then a third. The narrative wasn't cruel, it was clinical. And that scared my mother more than any accusation ever could. She called me at midnight. Her voice was shaking raw in a way I'd never heard before. They're calling me irresponsible. I closed my eyes. They're asking why. I gave my life to that business, she snapped. To this family. And you took mine for granted, I replied softly. She went silent. You could stop this, she said finally. One statement, one show of unity. Unity. Another word she liked. It always meant erasure. No, I said, not this time. You want me ruined? She whispered. I leaned back against the counter, exhaustion settling in my bones. I want the truth on record. What happens to your image is up to you. She hung up without another word. The next week was brutal. Depositions continued. Subpoenas went out. Vendors were contacted. Longtime associates distanced themselves quietly. Claire stopped coming into the office altogether. My father showed up one afternoon, unannounced, eyes rimmed red. She won't eat, he said. She barely sleeps. I nodded. Neither did I when she told me I was dramatic for wanting fairness. He looked away. She says you're punishing her. I met his gaze. I'm holding her accountable. He sighed deeply. She doesn't know how to survive without control. I softened then, just a little. Neither did I, but I figured it out. That night I found a message from Claire waiting in my inbox. I don't know who I am without her guiding everything. But I also don't know who I am with her anymore. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. You don't have to decide right now, just don't lie to yourself. She didn't respond. By the end of the month, mediation was scheduled. A last attempt to avoid trial. We sat in separate rooms, shuttled back and forth like children who couldn't be trusted to share space. The mediator spoke gently, carefully. There's a lot of emotion here. I smiled faintly. There always is. My mother's offer came back first. She would step away permanently, issue a statement citing health concerns, transfer remaining authority quietly. In exchange, she wanted my silence. No more audits, no testimony, no public record beyond what already existed. My lawyer looked at me. It's a strong offer. I closed my eyes, weighing it. Peace, clean edges, and a lie preserved. I thought of my grandmother's handwriting, of the letter I'd written, of the years I'd been told to be calm. No, I said. The mediator blinked. May I ask why? Because silence is what got us here, I replied. And I'm done paying with it. When the mediation ended, my mother stormed past me in the hallway, eyes blazing. You've destroyed this family, she hissed. I didn't flinch. No, I stopped pretending it was whole. She walked away without looking back. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, the city humming outside. I wasn't celebrating. I was grieving. Not for the family I had, but for the one I'd never get. And in that grief, something else took root. Resolve. Because once you choose truth over comfort, there's no going back. And the hardest part was still ahead. The trial date was set for early fall, the kind of season that feels like an ending even before anything actually ends. Leaves turning, light thinning, the city pulling inward. It matched the mood perfectly. Up until then, everything had been theory, paperwork, positioning. Now there was a clock on it. I didn't tell many people. There was no reason to. The fewer witnesses to your fear, the easier it is to walk through it without flinching. Claire found out anyway. She showed up at my apartment on a Sunday afternoon, eyes red, hair pulled back too tight. She looked like someone who had been holding her breath for weeks. She won't settle, she said without preamble. I poured us both coffee and waited. She says this has to go all the way, Claire continued. That if she backs down now, she'll look guilty. I set the mug down slowly. She already does. Claire rubbed her temples. She thinks the court will see you as bitter, as unstable. I smiled faintly. That's always been the plan. You don't understand, Claire snapped. She's preparing to paint you as vindictive, ungrateful, a daughter who turned on her own mother. I looked at my sister, really looked. The fear wasn't just for our mother. It was for herself, for the life she'd built leaning against someone else's certainty. Let her, I said. Claire's eyes widened. You don't care. I care, I said quietly. I just don't panic anymore. She shook her head. I don't know how you're so calm. I thought about that for a moment. Because this isn't the first time I've lost my family, I said. It's just the first time I'm not pretending I haven't. That stopped her. She sank onto the couch. She wants me to testify. My chest tightened. About what? That you manipulated her. That you pressured her. That you've always been jealous. I held her gaze. And what do you want to say? Claire's mouth opened, closed. She looked like she might cry. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know who I am in this story. I softened then, just a fraction. You don't have to be anything but honest. She laughed weakly. Honest would ruin her. No, I said, dishonest will ruin you. She stayed for another hour. We didn't argue. We didn't strategize. We just sat in the quiet, two women realizing how expensive loyalty can be when it's demanded instead of earned. After she left, I opened my laptop and reread my witness outline. Not what my lawyer had prepared, mine. I'd written it myself. Not to rehearse answers, but to anchor myself. Dates, conversations, decisions. Moments where silence had been demanded. Moments where I'd complied. This wasn't about winning, it was about coherence. The week before trial, my mother sent a message through her attorney. Not an offer, a warning. She intends to testify that you were emotionally volatile and prone to exaggeration. I stared at the screen, feeling something almost like amusement. Of course she would. That narrative had worked for decades. Why change it now? The night before trial, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, lights off, watching the city glow through the window. I thought about being 10 years old, standing in the hallway while my mother told my aunt, she's sensitive. You have to be careful with her. Sensitive, another word that meant inconvenient. I thought about being 25, working late, while Claire celebrated a promotion I'd quietly secured for her through contacts I never claimed. I thought about being told again and again that love meant letting things go. By morning, I felt hollow and sharp at the same time. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Fluorescent lights, wood polished to a dull shine, the quiet hum of air conditioning. My mother sat across the aisle, immaculate as always. She didn't look at me. My father sat behind her shoulders, heavy hands clasped too tightly. Claire wasn't there. That hurt more than I thought it would. The opening statements were brief, clean, focused. My lawyer spoke about fiduciary duty, governance, transparency. Her attorney spoke about betrayal, family loyalty, a daughter who couldn't let go. When it was my mother's turn to testify, she walked to the stand like she was attending a luncheon. She spoke well, calm, controlled. She painted herself as a woman overwhelmed by responsibility, pushed out by a daughter who resented her sister. Then it was my turn. I took the stand and felt every eye on me. I didn't rush, I didn't shrink. I told the truth. Not dramatically, not defensively. I spoke about processes, about approvals, about being excluded from decisions I was legally entitled to participate in. When her attorney tried to provoke me, I stayed steady. Isn't it true, he asked, that you've always struggled with feeling overlooked? Yes, I said, because I was. Murmurs rippled through the room. And isn't it true that you acted out of anger? No, I replied. I acted out of clarity. When he pressed harder, I didn't flinch. I was angry once, I said, but anger fades, records don't. That line landed. I felt it in the room. The turning point came unexpectedly. My mother's attorney asked about my relationship with Claire, about rivalry, about jealousy, and I answered honestly. I protected her, I said, for years. I covered mistakes. I absorbed blame. I believed that was love. The judge leaned forward slightly. And when did that change, he asked. When I realized love that requires silence isn't love, I said. It's control. The room went still. The verdict didn't come that day, or the next. But when it did, it was decisive. The court ruled in favor of governance reform, confirmed my co-ownership, ordered restitution of misused funds. No criminal charges, no spectacle, just a written record that couldn't be rewritten. Afterward, outside the courthouse, my mother stood alone. She didn't approach me. I didn't approach her. Claire called that night. I didn't testify, she said quietly. I told them I wasn't prepared to lie. I closed my eyes. Thank you. She exhaled. I don't know what happens now. I looked out at the city lights, softer somehow. Now, I said, we learn how to live without pretending. When I hung up, I didn't feel victorious. I felt done. And for the first time, that felt like freedom. After the verdict, the world didn't end. That surprised me. I had spent months bracing for impact, for some dramatic collapse, where everything either burned or healed in one clean moment. Instead, life continued in small, stubborn motions. Traffic still snarled at the same intersection. The coffee shop downstairs still ran out of oat milk by noon. The office still buzzed with phones and printers and quiet conversations about weekend plans. Justice, it turned out, didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with paperwork. The first thing I did was not call my family. I went to the office. People looked up when I walked in. Not with fear or curiosity, but with something new. Relief. The kind that comes when uncertainty finally chooses a direction. Megan met me halfway down the hall. They're waiting, she said. Who's they? She smiled. Everyone. We gathered in the conference room. No suits this time. No lawyers. Just the staff. The people who had kept the place running while the family quietly imploded. I stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the wood. I know the last few months have been unsettling, I began. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. A few nods, no one interrupted. The court ruling gives us clarity, I continued. But clarity only matters if we use it well. I laid out the plan. Transparent reporting, shared oversight, clear channels, no special access, no exceptions dressed up as favors. This company survives because of you, I said, not because of my last name. When I finished, the room was quiet for a beat. Then Megan spoke. Thank you. Not applause, not praise. Just thanks. That was enough. Later that afternoon, I found a note on my desk. Handwritten, slanted, hurried. Proud of you. Took courage, Dad. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't an apology, it didn't erase anything. But it was real. Claire didn't come in that week, or the next. When she finally did, it was on a Thursday afternoon, just as I was packing up to leave. She stood awkwardly in my doorway, hands shoved into her coat pockets. I got an offer, she said. I waited. A job, different city, different industry. My chest tightened, though I wasn't sure why. Are you taking it? I asked. She nodded. I think I have to. I don't know who I am here anymore. I studied her face. She looked lighter, sadder, more honest. That's not a bad thing, I said. She hesitated. I'm sorry. The words landed softly, not as an absolution, as a beginning. I know, I replied. She swallowed. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not handing it out, I said gently. I'm just not holding on to anger. She smiled faintly. Figures. You always did things the hard way. She left without hugging me, without ceremony. And somehow that felt right. My mother didn't call. She didn't write. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard she'd withdrawn from most social circles, sold the house, moved somewhere quieter. I wondered if she felt relief or resentment. Then I stopped wondering. Not everything needs a closure to end. One evening, weeks later, I sat alone in my apartment scrolling through old photos on my phone. Holidays, birthdays, smiles that felt staged now but had once meant something. I deleted most of them, not out of spite, out of space. I needed room for what came next. That realization came into focus on a Sunday morning when I woke without dread for the first time in years. No tightness in my chest, no rehearsed conversations looping in my head. Just quiet. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the city wake up. People walked dogs. A couple argued playfully over directions, someone laughed too loud. Life indifferent and generous all at once. I thought about the word revenge. It wasn't what I'd imagined. There was no moment where I stood triumphant over anyone. No satisfaction in my mother's retreat or Claire's departure. The real revenge was this. I woke up without asking permission to exist. At work, the company stabilized, slowly, steadily. Clients returned. New ones signed on. The systems we put in place began doing what systems are supposed to do. Protect people from personalities. One afternoon, Megan stopped by my office again. "We're doing better," she said. "Not just financially, culturally." I smiled. That was the goal. She hesitated. "You know, a lot of us stayed because of you. Even before all this, you were always the one who listened." I looked down at my desk. "I'm glad it mattered." "It did," she said simply. That night, I went home and opened my grandmother's box one last time. The papers, the notes, the photo. I added something new to it. A printed copy of the court ruling, not as a trophy, as a marker. Then I closed the lid and slid the box onto a high shelf. The past didn't need to be on display anymore. Weeks turned into months. The trial became a story people told less often, then not at all. One evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. It was my mother. "I don't know how to talk to you now, but I see what you built. Take care of it." No signature, no warmth, but no venom either. I stared at the message, then set the phone down without replying. Some bridges don't need rebuilding. They just need distance so you can see where they were unsafe. I went to bed that night feeling something settle into place. Not happiness, alignment. I had stopped contorting myself to fit a story that needed me small. And tomorrow I realized I wouldn't wake up as a daughter or a sister defined by omission. I would wake up as a woman who chose herself. The final reckoning wasn't public. It wasn't loud. It was the quiet certainty that no one could take my life apart again without my consent. And that, more than any verdict, was the win. The strangest part came after everything settled. Not during the trial, not during the fallout, not even in the weeks when my family scattered into separate silences. It came later when there was nothing left to react to. No more emergency meetings, no more legal deadlines, no more carefully worded emails from attorneys or reporters sniffing for a quote. The noise faded, and what remained was a quiet I hadn't prepared for. For most of my life, I had existed in opposition, responding, adjusting, anticipating moods before they surfaced, solving problems before anyone admitted they existed. Now there were no problems with my name on them, and that was unsettling. On a Monday morning in late October, I sat in my office staring at a blank legal pad. No agenda, no fires. The company was running smoothly, almost eerily so. Systems in place, people empowered, decisions distributed instead of hoarded. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt exposed. When you've spent your life being useful to survive, stillness can feel like standing in the open without armor. Megan noticed before I did. "You've been quiet," she said gently, leaning against my doorframe. "I'm always quiet," I replied. She smiled. "Not like this." I closed my laptop. "What do you mean?" "You're not bracing," she said. "It's like you're waiting for something to go wrong." The words landed deeper than I expected. That night, I went home and stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. Studied my own face, the lines of tension that had softened, the eyes that no longer scanned for danger. Who was I when no one needed me to absorb impact? That question followed me into sleep. I dreamed of my grandmother. She was standing in the old kitchen's sunlight pouring through the window hands dusted with flour. She looked up at me and smiled the way she always had. Not proud, not approving. Certain. "You did what you needed to do," she said. Then she turned back to her work as if my crisis had never been the point. I woke with my heart steady. The next day, Claire called. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. "I'm leaving Friday," she said. I sat down slowly. "Where to?" "Chicago," she replied. "The job is real hard, no safety net." I smiled to myself. "That sounds like you're finally choosing something for yourself." She laughed softly. "I don't know if I'm brave or just out of options." "Sometimes those look the same," I said. She hesitated. "I wanted to tell you before Mom did, or Dad." "Thank you," I replied. Another pause. I don't expect us to be close, she said carefully, but I don't want to be enemies. I considered that. The years of resentment, the recent truths, the fragile honesty in her voice. We don't have to define it yet, I said. Just don't lie anymore, to me or yourself. She exhaled. I won't. When the call ended, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Not for reconciliation, for growth. My father visited a week later. He stood in my apartment doorway looking unsure like a man entering unfamiliar territory. I won't stay long, he said. You can, I replied, if you want. He stepped inside, eyes drifting over the room. You've made it your own. Yes, I said simply. He sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded. I've been thinking a lot. I waited. I told myself I was keeping the peace, he continued, but really I was avoiding conflict and letting you carry the weight. I swallowed. I know. He nodded. I should have protected you. The words were quiet, unpolished, late, but they were real. I can't undo it, he said, but I can stop pretending I didn't see it. That mattered more than an apology. We sat in silence for a while, not uncomfortable, just present. When he left, he hugged me awkwardly, like he wasn't sure he still had the right. I let him. That night, I took the box down from the shelf again. My grandmother's box. I opened it and spread the contents on the table. Then I did something I hadn't expected. I removed half of it. I kept what mattered, the draft will, the photo, the letter. The rest went into a shredder. Not because it hurt, because it no longer needed to be preserved. The following weeks brought invitations, speaking requests, panels on governance and ethics. People wanted my story packaged and palatable. I declined most of them. I didn't want to be known for surviving my family. I wanted to be known for what I built after. One Friday evening, as the sun dipped low, I locked up the office and walked home instead of driving. The air was crisp. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk. I passed families heading to dinner, couples arguing quietly, a woman laughing into her phone. Life uncurated. For years, I'd believed justice would feel like vindication. Instead, it felt like space. Space to breathe, to choose, to stop rehearsing explanations. At home, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the floor back against the couch. The same place I'd sat months ago when everything felt like it was falling apart. This time, nothing was breaking. I picked up my phone and typed a message I'd been avoiding. To myself, you don't need to earn rest. You don't need to justify peace. You are allowed to exist without proving your value. I saved it. Some lessons take a lifetime to learn. Others arrive only after you burn down the lie that kept you small. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, one thought stayed with me. The hardest part wasn't confronting my family. It was learning how to live without the role they'd assigned me. And tomorrow I would practice that again. Not perfectly, but freely. The morning I realized I was finally free didn't feel dramatic. There was no surge of triumph, no cinematic clarity, no moment where the past lined up neatly and apologized. It was just a Tuesday. Gray sky. Quiet street. The kind of morning that used to make me uneasy because nothing demanded me. I woke without an agenda. That was new. For years, my worth had been measured by reaction time. How fast I fixed, how well I smoothed, how quietly I absorbed. Now there was no one waiting for me to manage their emotions before breakfast. I made coffee and stood by the window watching a woman across the street struggle with a stroller, laughing as she finally got it over the curb. No one rescued her. She didn't need rescuing. She figured it out. That felt important. At the office later that day, the company moved like a living thing instead of a fragile one. People spoke up, decisions were shared, mistakes were addressed instead of buried. I walked through the space without bracing for backlash, without calculating how to soften myself to keep someone else comfortable. Megan stopped me near the copy room. "The new client signed," she said. "They specifically asked that you stay involved." I nodded. "Tell them I will." She hesitated, then smiled. "You know you changed the culture here." I shook my head. "No, I just stopped letting fear run it." That afternoon, I received an email from the court clerk confirming final compliance. Case closed, language dry and procedural, no ceremony. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, then closed the laptop. It was done. Not just legally. Internally, I walked home instead of driving. The city felt different when I wasn't rushing to outrun something invisible. I passed a bookstore and went in on impulse, running my fingers along spines, choosing a novel purely because the first line made me pause. Choice without justification. At home, I cooked dinner slowly, burned the garlic, laughed at myself, ate standing at the counter, no one to perform for. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. It was Claire. She sent a photo of a small apartment, Bare walls, one chair, boxes stacked unevenly, made it the message read, "It's terrifying and kind of exciting." I smiled and typed back, "That's how growth feels at first." She replied almost instantly, "Thank you for not destroying me when you could have." I stared at the words. I hadn't wanted destruction. I'd wanted balance. I set the phone down and thought about my mother, about the silence between us that had settled into something permanent but no longer sharp. I didn't miss her voice the way I once had. I missed the version of myself I'd tried to be for her, but that version was gone. And I didn't want her back. A week later, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Me, taken years ago by my grandmother. I was sitting on the porch steps, mid-laugh, hair in my face, unguarded. On the back in my mother's handwriting was one sentence. "I didn't know how to love you without controlling you." No apology, no request. Just truth. I folded the photo carefully and placed it on my bookshelf, not in the box, not hidden. Seen. That night I dreamed of nothing. No courtroom, no confrontations, just dark, quiet rest. When I woke, the peace didn't evaporate. It stayed. Weeks passed, then months. I began saying no without rehearsing. Yes, without guilt. I took a short trip alone, walking through a coastal town, eating when I was hungry, resting when I was tired. No one needed me to be smaller there. On my last night, I sat by the water and watched the tide roll in and out, steady and indifferent to my history. That was when it finally clicked. Revenge hadn't been the point. It was the doorway. What waited on the other side wasn't victory. It was sovereignty. I had taken back authorship of my own life. Not loudly, not cruelly. Completely. Back home, I stood in my apartment, now filled with objects chosen only because I liked them. Books, plants, a chair by the window that faced the morning light. I picked up a notebook and wrote one final line. "I am no longer available for stories that require my disappearance." Then I closed it. If you're listening to this, and something in your chest feels tight, if you've spent years being the calm one, the reasonable one, the one who holds the family together while slowly coming undone, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not selfish for wanting fairness. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not dramatic for noticing harm. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop playing the role that keeps everyone else comfortable. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, overlooked, or quietly erased, I'd love to hear your story. Like this. Subscribe. Share your truth in the comments. You are not alone, and it is never too late to choose yourself.